You know that feeling when someone calls your name and you turn around, but nobody's there? Now imagine that voice is your own. Imagine hearing yourself scream for help from somewhere out in the darkness, begging you to come closer. That's when you realize you've crossed a line you can't uncross. My name is Phil Dresden, and I'm a federal investigator with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Was, I should say, after what happened in New Mexico 3 months ago, I don't think I can go back. But I need to tell someone what I found out there in those Red Rock canyons. I need someone to understand why the things we do in the name of national security sometimes open doors that should stay locked forever. It started with a corruption case, routine stuff, or so I thought. We'd received reports that a construction company had been bribing tribal officials to gain access to protected lands near Shiprock. The kind of thing I'd investigated a dozen times before. Sacred sites bulldozed for profit. Land rights trampled for a freeway extension or a strip mall. I'd seen it all. And I was good at my job. Clinical. Professional. I documented everything with photos and recorded interviews, built airtight cases that couldn't be dismissed. I drove out from Albuquerque on a Thursday morning. The sky was that perfect turquoise you only get in the high desert, and the rock formations rose up like ancient cathedrals made of rust and fire. Beautiful country. The kind of landscape that makes you feel small in a good way, like you're part of something older than human civilization. My contact was a woman named Nayeli Benali. She worked for the tribal council and had been the one to file the initial complaints. We'd spoken on the phone 6 times, and she had a no-nonsense way of talking that I appreciated. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or dance around the facts. According to Nayeli, the construction company had already started surveying work near an area the Navajo considered deeply sacred. She'd tried to stop them through official channels, but someone higher up kept greenlighting the permits. I met her at a diner in Shiprock just after noon. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and dirt under her fingernails, like she'd been working outside that morning. She ordered coffee and didn't touch it. "They're breaking ground in 2 days," she said without preamble. "I need you to see the site before they destroy it completely." "What exactly is out there?" I asked. The reports mention ceremonial grounds, but I need specifics for the case file. Nayeli's expression tightened. "It's not ceremonial, not in the way you're thinking. It's a prison." That got my attention. I sat down my own coffee and pulled out my notebook. "My grandfather was a medicine man," Nayeli continued. "He taught me things that don't make it into official tribal histories, things we don't share with outsiders because they sound like superstition or folklore, but they're not. They're warnings based on centuries of experience." She looked around the diner like she was checking to make sure no one was listening. The place was nearly empty, just us and an old man at the counter nursing a piece of pie. "There are things that exist in the spaces between," she said quietly. "Not quite spirit, not quite physical. The old ones called them Yi Nadalushi, skinwalkers, but that's not really accurate. It's more like they're echoes that learned to think, impressions left behind by people who died in certain ways, in certain places, and those impressions became hungry. I must have looked skeptical because she smiled, but there was no humor in it. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I went to college. I have a degree in environmental science. I didn't believe my grandfather either until he took me out to look at the boundary site when I was 16. He showed me what happens when the containment fails. Containment? Nayali nodded. The site we're going to see tomorrow, it's not just sacred ground. It's a seal. The carvings, the stone arrangements, the offerings, they're all part of a system that's been maintained for at least 400 years, maybe longer. It keeps the Yid Nandalushi trapped in the deep desert, away from populated areas. And these skinwalkers, what do they do exactly? They observe, they learn, they mimic. Nayali's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. If one of them catches you long enough, it can replicate everything about you. Your voice, your mannerisms, your memories. Not perfectly at first, but close enough that someone who doesn't know you well might not notice the difference. And the longer they study you, the better they get. Why? What's the point? We don't know. My grandfather thought they were trying to remember what it was like to be human. Or maybe they're trying to become human again. But the important thing is that the boundary keeps them contained. They can't cross it. They can only call out, try to lure people to them. And if you don't answer, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. So this construction company wants to build on top of a supernatural prison, I said. That's certainly a new angle for a corruption case. Mock if you want, Nayali replied, but I've seen the survey markers. They're not avoiding the carved stones. They're targeting them specifically. Someone knows exactly what that site is and what will happen if they break the seal. That changed things. If she was right, if someone was deliberately trying to access this location, despite knowing its significance, then this wasn't just about bribes and land rights. This was something else entirely. Show me, I said. We took her truck because she knew the roads. They weren't really roads at all once we left the highway, more like suggestions of where vehicles had passed before. The landscape opened up into something primordial. Red rocks stretched in every direction, carved into impossible shapes by wind and time. The silence out here had weight to it. Nayali drove for almost an hour before she pulled off into what looked like nothing at all, just more desert and more rocks. But when we got out and walked around a ridge, I saw the site. The carvings covered a massive rock face, symbols arranged in concentric circles around a central point. Some of them had been filled in with what looked like red ochre. Others were left bare, exposing the lighter stone underneath. Below the carvings, someone had arranged stones into careful geometric patterns. Between and around the stones, I could see dark stains on the ground. Blood, Nayali said when she saw me looking. Animal usually, deer or sheep. The offerings have to be maintained every season. My grandfather did it. Now my uncle does. If too much time passes without renewal, the boundary weakens. I took photos, lots of them. Good documentation was everything. I photographed the carvings from multiple angles, the stone arrangements, the entire site in context with the surrounding landscape. The symbols, I said, what do they mean? They're not really language, Nayali explained. They're more like anchors. Each one represents a specific point in the boundary. Together they create a web that the Yi Nadalushi can't cross. Think of it like a fence made of sound or light instead of wood. Invisible, but just as real. And if someone disturbs this, the anchors break, the boundary fails, and whatever's been trapped on the other side for the last 4 centuries gets out. I was about to ask another question when I heard it. My own voice, calling from somewhere beyond the ridge. Phil? Phil, I need help over here. I froze. Every hair on my body stood up. Nayali grabbed my arm. Don't respond, she said quietly. Don't even look in that direction. But the voice came again, and it was definitely mine. Same cadence, same slight rasp I got when I was tired. It sounded like I was in trouble, like I'd fallen and hurt myself. Phil, please, something's wrong. I can't move. Every instinct I had screamed at me to investigate. Someone was hurt. Someone needed help. Except that someone sounded exactly like me, and I was standing right here. They've been watching us since we arrived, Nayali whispered, learning your voice, testing the boundary to see if you'll come closer. The voice called again, more desperate this time. It sounded like it was crying, like I was crying, alone and injured in the desert. What happens if I go to it? It studies you up close, learns everything about you, and then it can become you well enough to fool almost anyone. Well enough to walk into your life and take your place. Not physically, you'd still be alive, but there would be 2 of you and no one would know which was real. We stood there for another minute while my voice called out from different directions. Sometimes it sounded far away, echoing off the canyon walls. Other times it seemed to come from just behind us, close enough that I expected to see myself standing there if I turned around. Then it stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. We should go, Nayali said. I wanted to argue, to investigate further, but the look on her face stopped me. This was her culture. Her knowledge. I was the outsider here. We walked back to the truck quickly, not quite running, but close. The whole time I felt like something was watching us, like the desert itself had eyes. On the drive back, Nayali told me more about the Yi Nadalushi, how they'd been created centuries ago when a group of medicine men turned to forbidden practices, trying to gain power by breaking natural laws. The transformation killed them, but something remained, something that remembered being human but couldn't quite achieve it again. They're stuck, she said, trapped between what they were and what they became. And they hate it. That's why they try to copy people. They're searching for a way back. And the boundary keeps them contained? As long as it's maintained, but there are stories about times when it failed. Whole villages disappeared. People reported seeing their relatives in 2 places at once. Children who came home changed, wearing familiar faces, but moving wrong. It took years to track down all the copies and restore the seal. How do you fight something like that? Nayali shrugged. You don't. You contain it. You maintain the boundary. You don't cross the line. That's the only way. She dropped me off at my hotel in Shiprock just after dark. Before I got out, she handed me a small pouch made of leather. White ash and cornmeal, she said. Traditional protection. Keep it with you. I know you probably think it's superstitious nonsense, but humor me. I took the pouch. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just ash and cornmeal, like it carried centuries of careful practice and hard-won knowledge. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on and went through my photos from the site, trying to process what I'd seen and heard. The rational part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Audio phenomenon caused by the canyon acoustics. Wind patterns, I don't know, something. But I'd heard my own voice out there. I'd heard myself crying for help. Around 2 a.m, I started going through the background research on the construction company. Nayali had been right about the money trail being murky. The company itself was legitimate, a mid-sized firm out of Phoenix that specialized in infrastructure projects. But the funding for this particular job came from a shell corporation registered in Delaware. And that corporation was owned by another shell corporation. And that one was owned by a private equity firm with ties to defense contractors. Defense contractors. I dug deeper, following the connections. The private equity firm had major investments in biotechnology companies. Specifically, companies working on advanced camouflage systems and identity verification countermeasures, facial recognition spoofing, voice synthesis, biometric manipulation. One of the companies in their portfolio had a classified contract with the Department of Defense. The public description was vague, something about advanced infiltration technologies for special operations. The pieces were starting to come together, and I didn't like the picture they formed. Someone in the defense industry knew about the Yi Nadalushi. Someone had figured out what they could do, and instead of being horrified, they saw an opportunity. I called Nayali at 6 a.m. She answered on the first ring like she'd been awake too. I need to see those survey markers you mentioned, I said, and I need to know if there's been any unusual activity around the site. Scientific equipment maybe? Observation posts? Why? Because I don't think this is about construction at all. I think someone's trying to study what's trapped at the boundary, maybe even harvest it somehow. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. There's a canyon about 2 miles from the main site, Nayali said finally. I saw vehicles there last week. Didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed they were surveyors. But they had equipment I didn't recognize. Looked more like laboratory gear than construction tools. Can you show me? Meet me at the diner in an hour. We drove out to the secondary location as the sun was coming up. The canyon Nayali led me to was narrow and deep, hidden from the main road by rocky formations. At the bottom, I could see tire tracks and the marks where heavy equipment had been set up and then removed. But what really caught my attention were the pictographs on the canyon walls. They were similar to the ones at the main boundary site, but older. much older, and someone had been documenting them extensively. I could see where they'd set up lights and cameras, probably for detailed photography. These markings, I said, are they part of the boundary system? Nayali studied them carefully. No, these are older, pre-boundary. They're records. Records of what? The creation of Yi Nadalushi, the ritual that transformed the medicine men. My grandfather showed me similar pictographs once and told me never to speak of them. The knowledge of how it was done is considered too dangerous to preserve. But someone's been studying them. We reached the canyon floor and found evidence of more than just documentation. There were collection sites where soil samples had been taken, scrape marks on the rocks where someone had removed small pieces of the carved symbols, and most disturbing, there were what looked like containment circles drawn in white powder, the same geometric patterns as the boundary stones, but scaled down. They're testing something, Nayali said, trying to recreate the conditions that created the Yi Nadalushi in the first place. Or trying to figure out how to extract what makes them work, I added. Weaponize it. We spent another hour documenting everything we found. I took photos, collected samples of the white powder, recorded GPS coordinates. All the while, I kept thinking about what Nayali had told me, about how the Yi Nadalushi could mimic people, become them almost perfectly. Imagine what the military could do with that capability. Infiltrate enemy organizations by replacing key personnel. Conduct espionage operations with perfect covers. Create agents who could literally become anyone they needed to be. And all they had to do was figure out how to extract and control whatever biological or supernatural mechanism made it possible. We were heading back to the truck when Nayali suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faint, I caught the sound of voices, multiple voices all speaking at once. Some of them sounded like Nayali. Some of them sounded like me. They were coming from deeper in the canyon, from a direction we hadn't explored yet. "We need to leave," Nayali said, "right now." But I'd already seen the equipment, about 50 yards ahead, partially hidden behind a rock formation. Someone had set up what looked like a mobile laboratory. Solar panels for power, satellite uplink, and inside a reinforced container, I could see monitoring equipment and what looked like a medical isolation chamber. The voices were coming from speakers mounted around the container, a recording playing on a loop. Dozens of different voices, all learning, all practicing human speech patterns. "They're not just studying the Yi Nadalushi," I said. "They're farming them." Nayali pulled at my arm. "Phil, we need to go if they catch us here." The gunshot hit the rock next to my head, spraying fragments of stone across my face. We ran. 2 more shots followed us as we scrambled back toward the truck. I didn't see who was shooting, but I heard vehicles starting up somewhere behind us. They'd been watching the site, probably had motion sensors or cameras we'd missed. Nayali's truck was old, but she knew how to drive it. We fishtailed out of the canyon access and onto the rough desert track, pushing the vehicle harder than it was designed to go. Behind us, I could see the dust plumes from at least 2 pursuing vehicles. "They're going to kill us," Naali said. Her voice was surprisingly calm. "They can't let us report what we saw." "Then we don't report it. We get evidence to people who can't be bought off. Media, maybe, or..." "No one will believe us, Phil. We're talking about shape-shifting entities and secret military experiments. We'll sound insane." She had a point, but I still had my photos. I had physical evidence. Surely that counted for something. We lost our pursuers on the state highway, or maybe they just decided we weren't worth the risk of a public chase. Either way, Naali drove us straight to her house on the outskirts of Shiprock. "Pack a bag," she said. "We both need to disappear for a while. I have contacts in Colorado who can help us, tribal activists who I've dealt with for this kind of thing before." I waited in the truck while she went inside. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. I finally got out and knocked on the door. It swung open at my touch. The house was empty, not just unoccupied, empty in a way that felt wrong. The furniture was still there, but all the personal items were gone. No photos on the walls, no books on the shelves, no clutter in the kitchen. It looked like a stage set of a home rather than a place where someone actually lived. In the bedroom, I found her clothes folded neatly on the bed. The flannel shirt she'd been wearing yesterday, her jeans, her boots, arranged carefully like an offering. Next to the clothes was a digital recorder. My hands were shaking as I pressed play. Naali's voice came through the speaker, but something was off about it. The cadence was wrong, like she was reading phonetically from a script she didn't quite understand. "Phil, if you're hearing this, then I'm already gone. I need you to know what's really happening here. The construction company, the defense contractors, they've been running experiments for 6 months. They found a way to temporarily break the boundary seal, just for a few seconds at a time. Long enough to expose test subjects to the Yi Nadalushi." Static crackled through the recording. When Naali's voice returned, it sounded different, more natural, but also more frightened. "The exposure triggers something, a change at the cellular level. The subjects start to exhibit the mimicry abilities. They can alter their appearance, their voice, their biometric signatures, but not perfectly, not yet. But the Pentagon believes with refinement, they could create the perfect infiltration agents, people who could literally become anyone." More static. Then her voice again, but now it carried a strange, hollow quality. "I volunteered as a test subject 3 weeks ago. I thought if I could get inside the program, I could sabotage it from within. But the process, it's not stable. The changes aren't just physical. They're psychological. I can feel myself fragmenting. Sometimes I'm not sure which version of me is real anymore. The one who grew up on the reservation? The one who studied environmental science? Or the one who can wear a dozen different faces?" The recording cut out for a moment. When it resumed, Naali's voice was barely a whisper. "They don't know how to reverse it. Once the change starts, it's permanent and it's progressing. Every day I can hold fewer memories. Every day, more of who I was gets replaced by this thing I'm becoming. Phil, you need to destroy the research, burn the laboratory, break the containment equipment. Don't let them do this to anyone else. A long pause, then almost too quiet to hear. I'm sorry I got you involved. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth from the beginning. But you seemed kind, and I thought maybe if I could save one person, it would mean something. It would mean Nayali Benali existed for a reason before she disappeared completely. The recording ended. I stood in that sterile, empty house and tried to process what I'd heard. Nayali had been a test subject. She'd already been changing when I met her. Everything she'd told me about the Yi Nadalushi, all that traditional knowledge, had it been real? Or had it been the fragmented memories of someone who was losing herself to an experimental procedure? I didn't know. I couldn't know. What I do know was that somewhere out in the desert, there was a facility conducting illegal human experiments, and they were willing to kill to protect their secret. I took the recorder and left the house. I drove straight to the canyon where we'd seen the mobile laboratory, approaching from a different direction this time. It took me 3 hours of careful navigation, but I found it. The lab was still there, but now there were guards, 2 of them armed with assault rifles, standing watch over the entrance. Professional military contractors by the look of them. This wasn't some rogue operation. This had official backing. I couldn't approach directly, but I could observe. I found a position on the ridge above the canyon and used my camera's zoom to document everything I could see. Over the next 6 hours, I watched them bring in test subjects. 3 of them hooded and restrained. They were led into the isolation chamber one at a time. After about an hour, they were led back out and loaded into a separate vehicle. Medical transport, judging by the markings. I photographed everything, the vehicles, the personnel, the equipment, every piece of evidence I could gather. As the sun was setting, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the subjects being loaded into the medical transport stumbled and her hood fell off. It was Nayali. Or at least it looked like Nayali. Same face, same build, same features. But the way she moved was wrong. It was mechanical, like something learning how to walk for the first time. Then I saw another Nayali being led out of the laboratory, and another. 3 of them identical, all moving with the same uncanny stiffness. They weren't testing the process on one subject. They were creating copies, multiple versions of the same person, probably trying to figure out which iteration was most stable. I thought about the recorder I'd found in Nayali's house, about the voice that had become less and less certain of its own identity. How many Nayalis had there been before these 3? How many had already fallen apart? I documented everything, and then I got out of there. I drove straight to Albuquerque and spent the night compiling my evidence into a comprehensive report. Photos, audio recordings, GPS coordinates, financial records showing the money trail from defense contractors to the construction company, everything. The next morning, I tried to submit it through official channels. My supervisor told me the file was corrupted and to resubmit. I resubmitted. Same result. I tried calling my supervisor directly. He told me I'd been on medical leave for the last 2 weeks. There was no investigation in Shiprock, no tribal contact named Nayali Benali in the system, no corruption case at all. I hung up and stared at my phone. 2 weeks? I'd been gone for 3 days at most. Unless I hadn't. I checked my call logs. The last call I'd made to my supervisor was dated 17 days ago. My credit card statements showed purchases at gas stations and restaurants I didn't remember visiting. Hotel charges in 3 different cities. I had no memory of any of it. I looked in the bathroom mirror and studied my face. Same features I'd always had. Same scar on my left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Same slight asymmetry in my smile. But was it really me looking back? How could I even know? I thought about Nayali's recording, about how she'd said the changes were psychological as well as physical, and about how she couldn't remember which version of herself was real anymore. What if they hadn't just documented me at the canyon? What if they'd taken me? What if the last 2 weeks had been spent in that isolation chamber, being exposed to whatever process they'd developed? What if I was one of the copies? I touched my face, trying to feel if anything was different. Everything seemed normal, but then wouldn't it? If I was a perfect copy, wouldn't I have all the original Phil's memories? All his thoughts and feelings and certainties about who he was? The only way I'd know something was wrong is if the process was imperfect, if I started to fragment like Nayali had. I called the local FBI office and I tried to report what I'd seen. They were polite but dismissive. Without official backup from my supervisor, I was just another person with a conspiracy theory. They suggested I take some time off, get some rest. Maybe they were right. I checked into a motel and tried to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard voices. My voice calling from the desert. Nayali's voice splintering into a dozen different versions of itself. 3 days later, I saw the news report. Federal investigator Phil Dresden speaking at a press conference about a successful resolution to a corruption case on Navajo land, praising the cooperation between federal authorities and tribal officials, announcing new construction projects that would benefit the community and create jobs. The man on the screen looked exactly like me, sounded exactly like me. He had my mannerisms, my speech patterns, my way of pausing before answering difficult questions. But when he smiled at the camera, I noticed something. His lips pulled back just slightly too far. His eyes didn't quite match the expression on the rest of his face. It was a copy, an imperfect one, but good enough to pass for me in a professional setting, which meant the real question wasn't whether they'd taken me, it was whether they'd kept me. Was I sitting in this motel room because I'd escaped? Or because they'd let me go after they got what they needed, after they'd successfully extracted and documented whatever made me who I was? I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not sure I ever will. What I do know is this. Somewhere in the desert near Shiprock, there's a facility conducting experiments that violate every ethical boundary we have as a society. They're creating technology that could fundamentally undermine human identity itself, and they're willing to destroy anyone who tries to stop them. Nayali Benali tried to warn me. She tried to stop them from within, and it cost her everything. I don't know how many versions of her still exist. I don't know if any of them retain enough of the original Nayali to even care anymore. I still have my evidence. I've uploaded it to secure servers with deadman switches. If anything happens to me, it goes public. But I'm not naive enough to think that that will stop the program. Too much money involved, too much potential military advantage. The best I can do is tell this story, hope that someone hears it and starts asking questions, hope that maybe somewhere there's still a version of Nayali Benali who knows she tried to do the right thing. As for me, I don't look in mirrors much anymore. Every time I do, I find myself searching for signs of degradation, checking to see if my face is starting to slip, if my memories are beginning to fragment. So far, everything seems normal, but that's what scares me the most, because if I was a perfect copy, that's exactly what I would think. The desert doesn't forget. It keeps everything. Every person who's ever walked there leaves an impression. And now someone has figured out how to harvest those impressions, refine them, and deploy them. If you ever hear your own voice calling to you from somewhere you haven't been, remember this: don't answer, don't investigate, don't try to figure out what's happening. Just run and hope that when you look in the mirror tomorrow, the person staring back is still you. Because by the time you realize it isn't, it's already too late to matter. Well, that wraps up this unsettling story. If you made it this far, be sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think. This is the last of my 5 episodes on folklore creatures. If you haven't heard the others yet, check them out with the links above or the playlist with all 5. And stay tuned for my next 5 episodes that will explore aliens and extraterrestrial encounters. And until then, have a frightfully fun day.